This is a chapter review for Vinland Saga 202, Thousand Year Voyage, Part 11. I, like everyone else, was really looking forward to this chapter. We had the promise of Canute being here. We had Yukimura saying after having a short chapter last month that this one we can expect something longer, which is great. And he absolutely delivered that. And we knew Canute would be here, obviously. Like I said at the end of last review, if they're going to say something as big as Canute will be in the chapter preview, although I would say don't fully trust the previews on face value, if they're going to mention Canute, it's very, very clear he will be there. And you can see here, he is. But with having Canute here, the question was that what were we going to do with him? And based on my observations of how Hild's character is progressing, I expected that this chapter would heavily focus on the parallels between Hild and Canute, as they're both people who hate war, but are willing to wield violence to prevent it. Now, with Hild, I've gone very in-depth about what I think she's doing, her true intentions, what she's truly capable of, and I'm still hesitant to say that she's truly out for blood here as the first option. It seems more likely that she's taking the approach of threatening people, threatening violence, and that is still very much in line with the Canute idea. It is his iron will, his rule over these people, and the threat of him doing what needs to be done that keeps his paradise in order. And that's very much the direction Hild is going, even if she doesn't immediately go for a kill. But let's just get into what Canute's doing here and what the parallels are to Hild. So let's begin. Thousand Year Voyage, Part 11. So the chapter opens up here, as you can see, with Canute giving the order for his soldiers to kill a group of civilians, his own people. And immediately, reading this page, you think, oh god, Canute, what are you doing? This makes me think of Anne's village, having all these civilians gathered in a group to be slaughtered at his command, just like Askeladd. It's very reminiscent of that. So immediately, I'm very concerned about the direction Canute has headed. But we can see that all of his soldiers have their mouth and nose covered. You can see as they're burning these homes in this small village, they're executing people who hide and try to escape. And you see nobody is fighting back. Anybody trying to run is killed. This is not some kind of struggle. This is an ordered slaughter of innocent people, no matter how you look at it. But we see here at the bottom of the page, one girl is on the ground and she appears very weak. You can see in the bottom left panel, she's breathing very heavily. She's got bags under her eyes. Her hair is a bit messy. This is clearly somebody who's not in a good physical condition. One of the soldiers is told not to get close and not to hesitate, as he has to shoot her. The soldier is unsure. He hesitates, thinking of how this girl appears to be the same age as his daughter. But despite this, he looses the arrow into the side of her head. With the matter taken care of, Canute retreats to a safe distance, overlooking the village he's just destroyed. The look on his face is as cold as ever here, but I think not without a look of sadness in his eyes, as he's done what he must. But Wolf arrives here, and he calls out to Canute. He asks Canute why he's come here, extremely concerned about Canute's health, and Canute responds, "The demon is necessary. I am forced to kill my peaceful citizens. That is why I had come." Canute is essentially saying here that he has to come to take responsibility for committing these actions. He felt it necessary to do this, but at the same time he feels it is a sin that he must own himself in person. And now here we are finally told why Canute has done this, and it's because an epidemic has spread in this village, and he is aggressively eradicating it alongside his citizens. Wolf confirms that the source of this epidemic was an unidentified ship that drifted to shore 20 days prior. Those who searched the ship and their families were the first to fall ill. Canute says the ship must be burned immediately. Despite Wolf wanting to investigate, Canute will not take any further risk of contamination. And it's interesting, at the bottom here, Canute mentions how there were large-scale epidemics in the days of King Alfred, but he is unsure if it's the same disease. Just as he did with his own father, Canute rules in such a way that he aggressively avoids the failings of his predecessors. He is not going to be another failure of a king. He is going to achieve what he sets out to do, his paradise on earth. But Canute tells Wolf that the people in the surrounding area should be confined for a month to ensure the infection is eradicated. Wolf supportively agrees and assures Canute that his resolute measures will quickly end this problem. Although his actions will achieve the necessary outcome, Canute is not content to leave this unquestioned. He looks over the devastation and asks aloud, if it were Thorfinn, what would he do? How would he deal with it? He knows absolutely, just as we do, that Thorfinn would not kill people, as Canute has done here. Canute thinks to himself, if Thorfinn's way of not killing, not making enemies were possible, it would create a true paradise. And it's so interesting that he says true paradise here. It's almost an acknowledgement that the paradise he is creating is still going to be stained by his methods of achieving it. He is creating paradise, yes, but it would not be the true paradise he wishes for, the one that would be made by Thorfinn's way. He knows that if this true path to utopia is Thorfinn's way, he would not be able to imitate it. And that just speaks to why it's a true battle for Thorfinn. This is the hard way. He is taking the easy way, and he knows he could not walk the path that Thorfinn does. But Wolf tries to reassure Canute once more, telling him that he knows he loves his people deeply, and that the path he follows is the true path towards utopia. But Canute just looks down at the destruction of his own creation and just laughs at the irony of Wolf saying such a thing, as these people he loves so deeply are dead before him. But meanwhile, far to the west across the sea, we return to Thorfinn. He, Einar, and Bug-Eyes are at the meeting location where they're waiting to meet Polmuk and Nisquajish. We established this, I believe, 2 or 3 chapters ago, that these two groups are meeting on a small scale, trying to mend relations. But it's past their scheduled meeting time, and Thorfinn is already worried. Bug-Eyes proposes that maybe one of the parties has gotten the day wrong, but Thorfinn is at least positive that he has the day right. He has kept count. This is the first we are seeing of Thorfinn since Hild left to find Mysek. And we see his first course of action here is to warn the new friends about what Hild is planning. He is just going to open communication immediately before things get out of hand. Unfortunately, Polmuk and Nisquajish will not be showing to this meeting, and he will not be able to warn them just yet. But Speaking of Hild, the conversation moves to focus on her. Einar mentions that the children miss her. Of course, she is their teacher, and she has been an important role model for the kids. And her intelligence has been this very important aspect of her that she's been able to fully embrace again and give to the kids. And it's just sad that they no longer have that. And it does not bode well for how the kids will continue to develop, as we've seen the adults of the village are giving them ideas that are not taking them in the right direction. But Thorfinn, after a brief pause, says that when she forgave him, he had assumed that meant she shared in his feelings on violence as well. But he now sees that he was wrong. What's so interesting about this to me is that as the reader, we made this exact assumption too. Like Thorfinn, we are very used to his companions agreeing with him and his methods, but Hild is her own person with her own values and her own problems she needs to face. She is not just going to be another person who follows Thorfinn blindly. But Einar responds to Thorfinn here, saying how he sees Hild's way of thinking to be very similar to Canute's, where smaller sacrifices are necessary for the greater good. Back when they confronted Canute at the farm, Einar was very angry at Canute for his approach, because he had had the perspective of the sacrifice. Now, finding himself on Canute's side of the problem, he finds himself to be less stubborn and more understanding of his perspective. And we see Thorfinn looks up at Einar, and the look on his face shows he is not very comfortable with what Einar is saying. This is a very difficult thing for him to grapple with. But Einar continues, saying that Canute is absolutely a piece of shit. But it's just that now he sees that Canute is not killing for the sake of it, but killing out of necessity, while completely anguished at having done so. Thorfinn hesitantly says maybe. Like he said to Canute on the farm, he truly can't know which method is the correct way to paradise, to peace. So he can't deny Einar here, just like he couldn't fully deny Canute either. But Einar brings the conversation back to Hild, considering that Hild killing Misek could prevent a war with the Ylnu. Again, Thorfinn begrudgingly says maybe. Einar continues, saying that if Hild is voluntarily taking the anguish of killing for the greater good, then perhaps this act of violence is righteous. Then Thorfinn does not begrudgingly accept this point. He adamantly refuses it. Thorfinn, unwavering, says, no matter the method, the anguish, or the good that could come from it, he cannot accept that righteous violence exists. Einar does not have a response to this. He just listens as Thorfinn continues. He brings the context of these words through his experience on how he has resorted to violence when driven into a corner. But despite being forced to use it, he cannot accept it as something righteous. Again, he sees having to rely on violence as a sign of his own immaturity. How he is not a full, true warrior for doing so. He reaffirms there is no righteous violence, and they must stop Hild. With nothing else left to say, Bug Eyes proposes they return to the village before the sun sets. And as we return to the village, we can see the people have gathered up around Arnheid. Thorfinn is confused, saying there isn't supposed to be a thing today. But Gudrid is there with Carly, and she calls out to Thorfinn. She explains that the ships have returned, and Vargar has brought the Markland settler back to the village. Thorfinn and Einar share a concerned glance as everyone gathers around to hear the survivor explain what happened in Markland. And that ends the chapter. So, there's a lot to analyze and talk about here. This was a very meaty chapter. So, let's go back over to Canute. Based on the preview, I expected this chapter to be all Canute, with an emphasis on comparing his actions to Hild's, while also showing the struggles of his paradise compared to Thorfinn's. This chapter essentially took that idea further by having Canute's situation open the chapter, and then having Thorfinn's perspective address the same thematic ideas in the same chapter. This structure is a lot like chapter 137 in Baltic Sea War, where the chapter opens with Canute's wolf hunt in the first half, and then continues with Thorkel's perspective in the second half. That's one of my favorite chapters for this reason, so I'm very happy we have another chapter like it, and this one just deals with subject matter that is even more interesting, which just strengthens that chapter structure all the more. The choice to have Canute tackle the problem of disease and showing the way his philosophy dictates he must treat that situation is a great way to make us start to think about how Thorfinn will have to deal with the very similar situation introduced in last chapter that is very likely coming to his settlement as well. From Canute's perspective, these people are sick, with no means of treatment available. He is killing here as a sort of mercy, but primarily it is to stop the spread of disease with absolute certainty. That is the true purpose. He could try to quarantine the sick instead of killing them, but if it is already too late to save them, then this might be the best thing for them. However, all that is just an excuse to justify Canute's decision to take the most effective choice to protect his people as a whole, which would be to eliminate the disease, eliminate the spread. But Thorfinn would probably ask, did you even try to save these people? Even if there isn't a known way to cure their illness or treat it, did you even try? The use of Wolf here, as well, as always, is really strong. I think he's not a character who shows up that often, but when he does, I always feel like he's bringing up really interesting things. He's Canute's right hand and will always support and reassure him and his methods. What Wolf fails to do in his support of Canute is question him. Even as Canute himself is unsure of his decisions, Wolf continuously assures him that he is absolutely in the right. This is what makes this last page here of Canute so good. As Wolf keeps telling him how good of a king he is, Canute just laughs at the absurdity with the juxtaposition of the dead girl from the start of the chapter below him here. It's a really brilliant page. And having Wolf not ask questions and question Canute is such a good parallel to Einar and how Einar is asking questions to Thorfinn, but we'll get into that later. Before leaving the Canute side of things, though, there's one thing we need to talk about, and that's the boat. Obviously, anyone closely following the Markland situation will see huge red flags with this unidentified ship drifting to shore carrying disease. It is a very far distance from Markland to Canute's territory, but we have been in Vinland for quite some time at this point, so there is a possibility, and maybe even a slight implication, that this could be the missing Markland ship. However, I'm hesitant to say this is absolutely the case for a few reasons. Whatever disease killed the native people in Markland, it seems likely to be something that the pioneers brought unknowingly because of a built-up immunity. that the natives in North America would not have been exposed to yet at this point in time. The disease we see here, though, has spread through this village and undoubtedly made the villagers sick, so much so that they needed to be killed. Perhaps it takes prolonged exposure and the pioneers have just gotten lucky, or perhaps the disease had mutated in Markland among its vulnerable hosts. But logic of the disease itself aside, it just seems unlikely that the Markland ship would make it all the way across the sea like this. It would almost make the world feel a bit too small. But we'll get into the disease a bit more later. Let's talk about Polmuk and Nisqually and where they are. Like Thorfinn says, I do not think this is some kind of simple mix-up. It's pretty obvious something, for some reason, has kept them from coming here. And whatever that is, it's something that's yet to be shown to us. So there are a couple possibilities I could think of. Possibility 1, Hild has already taken action. If she moves quickly and already made her move, and either she or the result of her actions were found, then that would certainly create a situation that would demand the full attention of everybody in the Gitpi tribe, including these two. Still, I think this is less likely. I suspect we will see her again before she takes action, and I doubt it would be relegated to a flashback later. Option 2, a similar division is occurring within the Gitpi tribe. So, since the incident at the Thing, where Misiekpeque's hand was cut off, we have gotten a great look at the division created in Arnheid's village. But we have not seen the effects within the Gitpi tribe. Although we have seen Polmuk and Nisqually, and they have been trying to mend relations, it is certainly possible that a faction who does not want the Norse around anymore has been growing within the tribe. I don't think Polmuk and Nisqually would be part of this faction, but they could have their hands full dealing with it, or even be kept from the meeting with Thorfinn against their will. I think this seems a bit too extreme to be happening already, though, and I doubt they are preparing for war at this point in the tribe. So option 3, disease has begun to spread. Last chapter and the incident here with Canute at the beginning of this chapter absolutely makes me think that sooner rather than later, disease will be hitting the Gitpi tribe. While I just said I doubt the tribe is preparing for war already, I do think if this unknown disease has made its way to them just as Misiekpeque warned them from his vision, then that could certainly be enough to push them over the edge. They may see it as a direct attack from the Norse that they don't quite understand, or as a spiritual punishment for allowing so many trees to be destroyed. I think this is the most likely scenario, which could mean that Hild is unknowingly approaching a very dangerous and high-tension situation. If she tries to take action, and the people are already feeling that they are under attack and they're scared, I think she may underestimate how much conflict she's coming into. But speaking of Hild and her solutions, let's talk about righteous violence. There are some negative reactions among readers to Thorfinn's refutation of righteous violence here, so I want to try to explain a bit what I believe his perspective is, and how there is a somewhat common misunderstanding of what Thorfinn, and by extension Yukimura, are saying. When Thorfinn and Einar talk about righteous violence, I believe this is to mean some kind of violence that is the right solution to a problem. I think the distinction that really needs to be made here is the difference between righteous violence and what I would call unavoidable violence. Thorfinn comments in this chapter on how he has engaged in unavoidable violence many times since making his oath, especially in the Baltic Sea War, where he was just continuously conceding on his ideals and fighting when backed into a corner. We know absolutely that if Thorfinn was put in a situation where somebody was going to harm an innocent person, and the only way to stop them is by using violence, he would do it. He is not saying here that he wouldn't. We saw in Baltic Sea War, he would. Despite this violence being unavoidable in that situation to protect the innocent, that violence was not something that he could look on as righteous. The approach he wishes to take, and that of a true warrior, is to understand the circumstances that create a situation where this violence is unavoidable, and prevent such a situation from coming to fruition at all. This is why, despite having no other choice in the moment but to resort to violence, he sees it as his own failure to not take the proper measures from the start. This is just as Thor said when he fought Askeladd. He relies on his sword because he's immature. Thorfinn has to rely on violence in those situations because he is immature. If he were the true warrior he wished to be, he would not have been in such a situation to begin with. And this is why Vinland is Thorfinn's ultimate solution. It's a clean slate where he can start from the very beginning to cultivate a society where such situations where violence is unavoidable simply never occur. This is why that violence cannot be seen as righteous to him. If the problem can be prevented from ever happening, then that is the true right solution, the first resort. So, if you are forced to use violence to defend yourself or the people you love, Yukimura is not saying that sitting back and allowing it to happen is the way of the true warrior. The true warrior who resorts to violence does not feel righteous about it, but feels shame, because it is a sad thing to have not found another way. This is an important mindset to hold because it is when you start to see violence as righteous that you begin to accept it as an option, or worse, feel content with using it. So, with all that righteous violence talk in mind, let's talk about Thorfinn and Einar. This is the best chapter Einar has had since the start of Baltic Sea War, easily. What made Einar such a strong character in the farm arc and early into Eastern Expedition was that he is a very average guy. And this is not to say that he is boring or basic. More so that, like the average person, he thinks with both his head and his heart, driven by a healthy mix of logic and emotion. This role makes him an excellent anchor to Thorfinn, grounding Thorfinn when he was lost and helping him understand the realities of his ideas as he formed his goals on the farm. This is when he's at his best as a character, when him being Thorfinn's anchor leads to important philosophical discussions between the two, with Einar asking the important questions and Thorfinn having to answer from his experiences. However, since the start of Baltic, around there, the two have essentially been on the same page with a shared goal, so there has not been much room for Einar to stand out in this role we see him in. But now, with their conversation in chapter, 199, as well as their conversation here in this chapter, we are starting to see Einar must play this role again. Thorfinn is now in a position where his more extreme idealism is really starting to conflict with how the average person like Einar and the reader thinks and feels. Like the reader, Einar understands Thorfinn very well, believes in him, wants him to succeed. However, it's getting to a point where Einar cannot help but ask questions out of concern for what everyone sees coming. So I believe Yukimura is building up to a very crucial disagreement between these two, when things become entirely out of control, where Einar will have to force Thorfinn to confront the reality he is, frankly, stubbornly avoiding. And all of this is just so great for Einar. It's felt for quite some time that he's not much of a character in his own. He doesn't have a lot to do, but here he has something to do. This is his purpose in the climax of this story. It's to ask the right questions. So, moving on, the Markland survivor. So, I'm glad he's already back and is ready to explain what happened in Markland. From the little we see of him here, there are refinements to make to what I suspect happened in Markland. One possibility I discussed last chapter was that both the native people and the Markland settlers were sick. This was based on his very sickly appearance when he was found. However, seeing him now, having been fed and rested, he's very clearly not sick. If he was sick, I also doubt they would bring him into the village. This reinforces the idea that it is an immunity issue, where the native people are vulnerable due to a lack of exposure. If he was not sick and the Norse in general are immune, then this makes it less likely there was a group quarantine situation like I proposed. Still, considering how this man used a Mi'kmaq word to describe the mass grave of the natives in Markland, I'm hesitant to think there was not any kind of group collaboration. This again makes us ask what happened to all the other Markland settlers if they did not fall ill. While this makes me lean more towards illness sparking a conflict between the two groups, there is again the point of how the arrow seemed to be left more so as a message than being an actual attack. So at this point, there are just so many ways this could have gone, and it's just very hard to say what really happened. But we'll get into that with predictions, so let's talk overall thoughts of the chapter. In my opinion, this is the best chapter since the start of Thousand Year Voyage. This is not to say Thousand Year Voyage has been lacking in any way. I've really liked all of the chapters since 191, but it is more of a testament to all the strengths this chapter brings to the table. This really is everything that makes Vinland so good. Everything with Canute here was handled perfectly. The parallels to Hild were addressed just as I hoped, although it was a bit more on the nose than I prefer by them straight up just saying that the two are a lot alike in their methods, but I'm glad it was addressed either way. That's exactly what I was hoping for. But what I was also hoping for, the way the two paradises are being compared here. I hope this continues as we approach the conclusion of the story, because the fact that neither of these two men will create their peaceful paradise on Earth is so important, and we need to keep seeing these parallels leading into the end. I had predicted that Willibald would be here in the Canute section. Sadly, no, but I'm sure Yukimura is just saving him for the epilogue, so no worries. Art this chapter, incredibly strong. I don't think I've noted the strength of the art in any of the Thousand Year Voyage chapters, and again, it's not because the art is weak. It just didn't really stand out, but this chapter looked really great. I think Thorfinn here looks great. I love these angles, the way his just face is being drawn. It's just something about it makes him look more mature, like fitting for his age. This is the son of Thor's, the man he's become. It's great. He looks awesome. Chapter length 2. This chapter was a long one and very good at that. Yukimura has been very vocal about his concerns with ending the story, and this has resulted in shorter chapters the past few months, or even delayed chapters. And it's all because of him being worried about his ability to execute on his ideas. He knows where this story is going and what needs to happen, but he needs to make sure he communicates it properly. Here, though, it really felt like he was back in his rhythm, so I hope he is feeling more confident now. So, let's talk next chapter predictions. Next time the tragedy is revealed. So we're absolutely getting the truth about what happened in Markland. So this is my last opportunity to predict what's going to happen. Well, what had happened, rather, based on our evidence. Again, it's very hard to say. There are a lot of possibilities, but I'll try to go over the aspects I at least confidently believe. The arrows are not from an attack. They were left to send a message. I don't think anybody doubts that. That seems like the kind of obvious conclusion. And I also don't think it's so obvious that it would be an intentional misdirection. I think absolutely there was not an attack. The settlers voluntarily abandoned Markland and were not forced out. That kind of builds off of, again, that there was not an attack. That would mean the Markland settlers left on their own. Again, it could have been that they felt threatened and they left, or threats were made, but I don't think the village was raided and they were forced out. They chose to leave. So then, what about the ship? If they tried to leave on the ship, why would they leave one person behind? I think the ship we see with Canute here is a red herring. I don't think that's the Markland ship. But the idea of burning the ship could be a hint at what happened. They may have burned the ship down because that's where the rats came from. That's where the disease came from. It may have been a measure to stop the spread. But with the survivor not being in Markland when Thorfinn went, but being there later when Vargar came to find him, still without the ship, plus the fact that he saw the dead natives and was able to comment on their interpretation of the sickness, it all points to him having gone to the nearby native tribe rather than escaping to sea. This, of course, brings the question, why is there only one person left? Why was he in such bad condition? This is where things start to get really hard to say. Could this man have been a doctor who stayed behind to help while the rest tried to leave on the ship to get help? Possibly when every native had passed away and he was left alone, he had no guide to help him return to the Markland settlement, and in going off on his own, he nearly starved to death before finding his way back. I'm sure I am way off on some points, but I'm confident I'm on the right track when I say there were friendly relations between the two groups, there was no attack on Markland, the Norse are less vulnerable to this disease if not immune, and this man was with the native people until they passed. That is the most confident take I can give, so we will have to see next month what the truth of this tragedy is. So that's it for this review. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you for chapter 203 next month. Bye-bye.